Hi everyone, I am Ed. I'm one of the co-founders of Hustle Badger, and today we're going to talk about growth loops. So just before I get going, a few bits of housekeeping. This is a live session. Please ask questions in the chat. I would be delighted to answer them. Maybe we'll even convince Susanna to answer some questions too, because she knows quite a lot about growth loops as well. Um, this is being recorded as well, and you can find or you will be able to find a recording of this and all our other webinars on our YouTube channel. You can also sign up for other um, events like this one on our Luma page, and I'm going to drop you a few links in the chat now so you know where to find them. Um, Worth mentioning, if you haven't come across Hustle Badger before, then we provide product management and AI training for people building digital products. And we have a wide range of courses, playbooks, templates, and a Slack community that help you do better at your job, basically, get promoted, um, and live your best life. So worth checking out our website if you haven't already found it. With that, I'm going to start talking about growth loops. So, what is a growth loop? Let's start at the beginning. A growth loop is basically a self-reinforcing engine for growth. So it is as you can see, like a loop or a circle that may have more steps than this, depending on how you write it out. But it always has sort of three, four steps, even if they're kind of articulated, split out into slightly more steps to make it obvious. So firstly, you're going to have some kind of input, some kind of starting material for growth. So this might be a new user joins your site. And I say, starting material, like it's not always a user, or sometimes a user is not the easiest way to think about this because you might think like actually what really drives our growth, and you'll see this in some of the examples, what really drives the growth of Zapier is integrations. What really drives the growth of Hustle Badger is content. So it can be interesting to think about this in different ways. And if this all, by the way, if this all seems a little bit abstract, I'm going to do a ton of examples, so don't worry about it. But I want to show you kind of like what the patterns are. The second thing you'll see then is that starting material, uses your product, and by using your product, it kind of creates value, value for both the users, but also for the business. And then that value is then reinvested in generating new inputs. So again, is that new users, whatever is fueling growth, that is then reinvested. And this is really the sort of the key point about growth loops is that they are circular, they are cyclical. So the outputs feed back into the inputs. And whilst it's rare to get growth engines that are kind of completely self-sufficient, sort of perpetual motion machines of growth, the idea is that they run for as long as possible with as little amount of input. And by doing that, they make growth much more efficient and much more scalable than it would otherwise be. So as an example, here is what this might look like for Miro at a very basic level. So, a user creates a Miro board, and your Miro board is effectively your unit of input, your unit of growth. They then share that Miro board with others so people can collaborate with them, right? That is going to, it's why they're using Miro, but also the other users are going to get value there. And then by sharing that board, other people are going to sign up to Miro so that they can make comments, so they can view the board and so on. But also some of them are going to create their own Miro boards. And then you're sort of back to the first step in the cycle. So this is sort of quite a neat user-driven cycle where each user may well bring in or is going to bring in other new users as well. So why do we talk about funnels, or how do we think about funnels versus loops? When growth loops started to be talked about, which is maybe 8 years ago, something like that, 8, 9 years ago, um, you know, a lot of noise was made about how these were completely different for loops. But I think in practice, they are not that different. And I would stress that you don't want to overthink this too much. In both cases, you are trying to understand, what are your growth channels? How does your company grow? And how do you increase your revenue effectively? The benefit of funnels is that they are very easy in concept. They're very easy to measure the steps. And so you can optimize them over time and it's very clear what's going on. The benefit of loops, though, the problem with funnels, I should say, is that um, they don't always focus on scalable growth channels. So it's very easy to think of a funnel where actually whatever you get out at the bottom doesn't feed in anyway to what goes in at the top. And that means that you can't necessarily scale up your funnel. You can improve it, but you can't make it any bigger. And that's a problem if you have ambitions to be a really big company. If you have ambitions to be a really big company, you want to be able to continue to grow and grow at an ever larger rate. So to be able to do that, you've got to be able to think in terms of scalable growth channels where you can reinvest, what you're getting out of each user or each kind of unit of growth to fuel further growth. And the benefit of growth loops, therefore, is really that they have that emphasis on reinvestment and scalability, but also they help you break down functional silos, so silos between, say, product, marketing, sales, operations. If you think about funnels, it's very often that people will sort of go, well, the top couple of areas, that's marketing's role. They're in charge of awareness, they're in charge of like driving traffic to the website, and then as soon as people hit the website, right, that's products, problem. Product then have to convert them into paying users. When you think about a loop, it encourages you to think of this as much more of an integrated system where retention, acquisition, monetization are all interconnected. And because they're all interconnected, they require a cross-functional approach to tackle them. So that means you have fewer functional silos. You have to work much more tightly with your marketing partners, your revenue partners, and so on. But also you think of holistic solutions to what you're trying to do. So not just building a better product, but also thinking about, well, who is your ICP? What are their needs? How do you make sure that you are attracting the right people? So with that kind of basic definition out of the way, I'll run through what are the four main types of acquisition loops that you get. First one is viral loops. So these are loops that are driven by users themselves. Each user brings in more users. Second is content. So here you are producing material that you can share on social media or that you can use to drive SEO, and that brings users in. Third one is paid loops. So here, everyone that joins the product or signs up to the product is giving you money, and you're then reinvesting that money into paid marketing. So that could be straight up performance ads, that could be affiliates, that could be influencer marketing, but it is a paid channel that you can invest increasing amounts of money in to give you growth. And the fourth one is sales. So similarly to paid here, but instead of investing in paid channels, you're investing in your sales team, the tooling they have, the process that they have, so that you can drive increasing amounts of awareness through your sales team and increasing sales closures and deal closures. Again, let's run through a few examples of these just so it makes sense. And again, if you have questions or you think these you don't get it, then please ask me. I'd say as we go through these, I wouldn't be too kind of hung up on categorizing what the types are, because as you'll see, like viral and content start to get a bit blurry, and it doesn't really matter. I think what this categorization is useful for is when you're thinking about what your channels might be, just recognizing where you're strongest and where you want to focus, and then thinking from that sort of like where you could add supplementary loops onto. So a couple of examples of viral loops. Firstly, Loom. So with Loom, you're doing short videos that you can share with colleagues to give them updates, explainers, all the rest of it. Then first thing that happens is a team member is recording a Loom video. All right, so you've got that video, they're then sharing it uh, either with their colleagues internally or externally, publicly. Those videos, they're really easy to use, really easy to record, and people love them. So some of those viewers who then see that are going to sign up themselves and realize that they can use it for whatever they need to do to collaborate with other team members. So that sends you around the cycle. Second example here, Typeform. So input, a user creates a survey using Typeform. They then share that with respondents. So however they're finding them, maybe that's their mailing list, social media, a paid list, whatever it is. Some of those forms are going to be Typeform branded, and some of those respondents are going to see the survey. They're going to love the UX and think, oh, great, I'll use Typeform for my next survey. And again, you're then going back around the loop again. We switch over to content, then Zapier is an example of this in a way. So every time that they create an integration in the product, that integration they're then writing up as multiple landing pages. How do you connect, Gmail to Stripe? So every time they do another integration, they can write up an ever increasing number of landing pages as they basically say, oh, if we've got 10 existing integrations, we can now run up, 10 of these landing pages that tell you how to connect to this new service, whatever it is. Each of those landing pages is going to drive traffic to the website. People are going to find that on Google. They're going to find it in LLMs, and they're then going to come to Zapier. Some of those people are then going to understand, oh, actually, this thing I wanted to do, that's easiest to do through Zapier. And so they're then going to sign up and create workflows and automations through Zapier, right? And that sort of is then going to give Zapier kind of signal about where they should be building new integrations. They're going to get signal from their existing users. They're going to see which connections, which landing pages people are landing on. And they can also look at sort of like where is their search volume for different connections as well. Another content example here, Reddit. So you have a user starts a thread, asks a question or posts a comment or gives a little microblog in a way. That thread is then going to draw in traffic from SEO, as well as attracting traffic from people already on Reddit. It's going to draw in new people via SEO who are Googling similar terms, or it's going to draw in people from, again, increasingly from LLMs who are indexing Reddit and other social media quite highly. People then who see that thread might sign up to comment on it or to get notifications or to sign up to the channel because they want to see more content like that. And then some of those people are going to start writing their own threads and kind of generating more content for this flywheel. We look at paid. A couple of examples here, but they're quite similar. I think it's more intuitive in a way. So Duolingo, a user arrives from a paid ad. Maybe they saw it on Instagram, or TikTok. They download the app. They go into Duolingo. They use it for a little bit of time, and quite quickly they upgrade to a paid version. And that revenue then from the new user is used to fund more ads. So in a paid loop like this one, then the time between, how long it takes from a user to sign up to be able to earn enough money to pay for that investment and the amount of money that they are paying, those are obviously key variables that you want to understand as how effective that growth loop is going to be. Similarly, Calm could be a very similar loop. So someone's going to arrive from an ad, they're going to sign up to a subscription, or a certain percentage of those people will sign up to a subscription, and that money from subscriptions is then going to fund more ads. Sales side, Again, that looks quite similar to paid in many ways. Um, you've got a new customer who's going to be closed by the sales function there. It's obviously going to be a longer process, more involved process than running B2C ads. Those customers are then going to drive revenue for Stripe by driving transactions through Stripe, and the money that Stripe makes from those transactions, they're going to reinvest in the number of sales reps they've got, the tooling they've got, the materials and process that their sales team have got, which is going to drive them more sales further down the line. Um, and a final example here, so Amplitude, similar sort of thing. New customer closed by the sales function, then they're going to pay an annual license to Amplitude for usage, on a per seat basis, and that money is going to be reinvested in the sales function as well as in the product, right? To kind of like increase the amount of functionality and increase the number of use cases served, so that then you've got a larger addressable market for the sales team to function. So some examples of growth loops there. Those were all kind of fairly basic ones just to get you in the idea of what's going on. And I'll show you how you can build on those a little bit later. But what I wanted to do is sort of just talk through, okay, so you're tasked with growing your company, or you're thinking about growth. Actually, what are the steps here for using growth loops as a framework to help you think through how you might grow and you know, yeah, how you might grow the company. So, firstly, there's some kind of prerequisites that you want to make sure you've got in place before you start thinking about growth loops. Once you've got those, and that's primarily retention. Secondly, um, you want to be able to map the customer journey, not just in the product, but through from their initial awareness of your product and their decision to look into a product for a new solution, for a problem that they've got, so that you understand what your value proposition is, what are the triggers they have for making that purchase. Based on that, and just from your kind of understanding of the company and what your product does, you should be able to define what your primary growth loop is, or understand what your primary growth loop is. And that then puts you in a place where you can optimize your growth loop by looking at how you can optimize all the different steps in it. And the other thing you can do is then think about how you might extend your growth loop by kind of bolting on additional sub loops that kind of reinforce the core loop. And that's how most companies grow, is they kind of like they start with a single primary loop, they make that work really, really well. And then if they feel that growth is kind of starting to dip on that primary loop, or they want to extend growth even faster and they've got the resources to do it, they will then look at building on additional loops that kind of support the primary one. So let's look a little bit at each of these steps in turn. So prerequisites. Before thinking about growth, you really need to have decent PMF, so product market fit, or good retention, because otherwise every new user that you inject into the product is going to churn out quite quickly, and you'll be wasting your time effectively kind of pouring users or like trying to kind of grow the product. So ways you can kind of determine whether you're ready for growth. Firstly, there's the classics of like retention curve that you'll see here on the left. And so your retention, if this is months after launch or weeks after launch, what you really want to see is something like the blue curve, where people join. And even if you get quite a lot of people dropping out quite quickly, what you see is this blue curve kind of stabilizing to a point where and flattening out, so that you've got some users who are sticking around for a long period. If what you're seeing is this something more like this red curve, where actually, maybe you're not seeing dramatic churn quickly, but you are seeing churn go basically to zero, like very low single digits. This isn't really enough. You're just not retaining enough of your users coming in to be able to grow the company. And this is quite similar to what you will see even in the kind of viral breakout hits like Be Real or Clubhouse, is they will often have like very high retention initially, but it just does not level out and it continues to drop to zero. So that means that they can grow very, very fast because they have strong viral loops to start with. But because no one sticks around, that is just like a wave of users passing through the product. So it grows very quickly, but then it also dies off very, very quickly. Other signals that you might get, if you're doing a PMF survey, have you got your classic kind of 40% of people who are saying, yeah, I'd be very disappointed if this product disappeared overnight. Or if you've got significant word of mouth, if you're seeing that from um, yeah, your attribution efforts, like when people join the product, a lot of them are saying that they were recommended by other people, or you just see a lot of people talking about your product positively. That could be a good indication as well if you don't have the data to show you retention. Um, but this really needs to be in place before you go any further. So once you've got that in place, the next thing I would do is then map out the customer journey, because this is going to basically provide you with the kind of the all the ideas and the fuel for the further steps. So I'd start really like, as I say, way before people come into contact with the product and think about almost like what is the point where they start to become aware of the problem? What is the trigger for them even thinking about this is a problem that needs to be solved? Why are they seeking a solution? What makes this a problem like right now? Then I'd have a look at the channel. So once people know that they've got a problem, how do they find out about you? What is the core message they respond to, or what is the things they are looking for? Then you can look at when people actually find you and come into contact with the product. What does that look like? So what does the onboarding process look like? How does the account creation process look like? What are the first few things that they are doing once they get inside the product? Um, I'd look at where people actually get value from the product. So, what are they doing, time after time? Why do they want to use the product? What is the value that they're getting out of it? And that might not be what you designed it for if you're very early on in your development. And I look at retention. So if you look at some of those people who are sticking around for a long time, what do they look like? What are they doing, time after time? What keeps them coming back? And also, is there anything that makes them stand out, that they did during onboarding that, or early on in the journey that other people didn't do? So this is often like a really good kind of signal for, what did people look further up this journey? So understanding this is going to be um, it's really important because when you're then thinking about growth tactics, having this kind of like understanding means that you can focus on the people who are most likely to have high retention, but you can also think about, what are the sorts of things you can do that are going to hit people, when they're at this trigger point, when they're at this channel point, and mean that you get kind of like a good flow of people into your growth loops. I just say in terms of actually doing this, then typical ways you'll be doing this are running jobs to be done, interviews, going and speaking to people who've just made a purchase. So that purchase journey is fairly fresh in their mind. You know, interviewing people who churned out the product, finding out why it didn't work for them, speaking to people who are kind of strongly retained power users, like what is working for them, and then customer journey mapping when people come into contact with the product as well, and just kind of mapping out, well, actually, even in the marketing campaigns and then through into the product, like what did that journey look like for them, not just in the kind of website or the app or whatever it was, but in all the touch points that they had. So emails, marketing campaigns, sales rep touches, calls, all the rest of it. So you understand from the customer's perspective, how did they find it? Um, does this apply for free products with upsell figures features? Yeah, absolutely. So you want to understand, like, firstly, how do people find the product, and presumably start using it on a free basis, and then what made them decide to upgrade to a paid plan, actually start buying it. Once you've done that, so you then understand your journey, you then should have sort of sufficient insights that you can start thinking about what your primary growth leap is. Now, I say, like, In most cases, this is fairly obvious, right? This is why I asked it in the chat, like, what's your kind of biggest growth channel? You know where most of your users are coming from already, and that should be a um, sort of an ongoing channel or a channel that you could keep doing. So if most of your users have come from Product Hunt, that is a problem because that is a one-off thing that is not going to give you users long term. But if most of your users are coming from your newsletter or SEO, that's fine because even if that's only one or two articles or posts that are driving users, you could go and generate more posts, more articles. You can do the research to kind of drive more traffic there. Um, so most important here is you want this to be aligned across the company. This isn't something that you can just decide in isolation in the product team, um, and then work on that basis. This is something where you want to have a like very, very transparent and direct chat with sales, with marketing. How do they think the company grows? Um, where do great leads, great customers come from? And how do you measure that? And so the first thing I would do is try and sketch out this loop kind of qualitatively, just like what are each of the steps and what might it look like. And then I try and put metrics on to measure each of the steps. And this doesn't have to be a kind of super tight, X% of this leads to X% of that. I think of this more in terms of if this was a dashboard, um, what are the numbers you'd want to see to be able to check that everything was working well? So, a couple of examples. So, if Loom, you're thinking about, okay, well, our input is creators, then so we're looking at, the more creators we get, then we should get more videos being created. If we get more videos being created, we should get more viewers, and the more viewers we get, we should get more creators, right? So you should be able to put numbers on each of those. And yes, you can then kind of track um, the conversion rate from each of these steps to one another to establish a baseline of performance, right? So you can then see if things are going to improve as you change things or not. Another example here, Zapier. So you might have your number of integrations. Every integration you produce, does it like how many landing pages does it produce for each landing page? How many unique users does it generate? And then how many for each for the traffic you're getting in, how good are you at converting that into more integrations? That's effectively like what is the efficiency of your product team? Just a quick note then on K factor as we talk about that, because as soon as you get the loop, then I think there's this kind of like push of like, okay, what is the K factor of the loop? And the K factor is kind of defined as, for each cycle of the loop, um, how many more or for each input you put into the loop, how many more inputs do you generate? So if that's driven by users, for each user that goes into the loop, how many new users did they generate? Um, so that is effectively the efficiency of the loop, where if it's greater than one, you would get exponential growth, right? So if every new user is generating 1.5 new users, then you're going to get an ever increasing number of new users coming into your loop. If it's less than one, then theoretically your growth will eventually die out, right? Because every user is only going to bring in, maybe 0.75 users next time round, and that 0.75 users is only going to bring in like, 0.49 or 0.5 of a user the second time round, and so on. It's just going to decline away. In reality, it's a K factor is, I've not found it that useful um, for a few reasons. It's quite hard to measure because when you're looking at how many people you get at each of these steps, it can be quite difficult to carve out or to attribute like which of those people came from the previous step because you will inevitably have like multiple sources of like new users and videos and whatever you're measuring. Um, you also, it's very unlikely that you get either exponential growth or completely stagnant growth. And it's much more typical for companies to have sort of non-exponential, but kind of slightly variable growth, somewhere in the middle. Um, and if you do get it above one, that is usually very, very short-lived. So even the most kind of viral products like classics like TikTok and Facebook, if you actually look at like how they grew when they were purely viral, they usually only have a K factor above one for a few months before it kind of drops down again. That said, um, you can have a K factor of like less than one, and it's still really valuable. Which is why I think the kind of growth loops is an interesting framework to look at. The other thing about K factor though is that it's not always like hugely actionable because there's no sort of like higher is obviously better, but because it can be valuable even when it's below one, it's not necessarily kind of telling you a lot that you don't get from looking at the kind of the components of the conversion rate from each step. Okay, so you've defined your steps, you've kind of quantified them somehow in some kind of metric. Then there's sort of three questions you want to be asking yourself. So, how do you maximize your impact of each step? So, how do you kind of like make each step just bigger on absolute levels? How do you minimize the friction between steps? So, how do you increase the kind of the conversion rate between steps? And then how do you increase the speed of the loop? So how do you sort of reduce the time going around the loop? Because each of these things will increase your growth rates, right? All other things being equal. So again, like taking Loom as an example, can you get each creator to post more videos? Can you get more views on each video? Can you reduce the time to creating a video? It's effectively like those three questions. And if those are the questions you're trying to answer, this work that you've done to map the customer journey, to understand the customer problem, to understand the alternatives, your value proposition, all that work you did in kind of mapping the customer journey, that is what's going to give you some ideas here of what you can do. Um, I kind of mentioned briefly about extending your growth loops, and this is an example of what that might look like. Again, this is still simplified, but I'll kind of show you how this works. So if we look at an example like Eventbrite, here they've got a loop where their basic loop is they have a creator create an event. That person then shares the event, um, you know, social media, email, however they do it. They sell tickets. People then attend their event, and some of those people might sort of see Eventbrite as a platform where they can host their own events and be like, oh, okay, great, I'll launch my next event there. But this loop they can then augment or build on, not by creating completely separate loops, but sort of creating additional paths that reinforce the primary one. So by optimizing their event pages for SEO, they're going to draw in new people to events. So then when a creator creates an event, it's not just people who the creator marketed to, it's also going to be other people who the creator didn't know about, but Eventbrite drew to those event pages that might end up buying tickets. So that's obviously like great for creators, great for Eventbrite, because the more people they draw in, the more creators they might get. And similarly, like you might have something like paid acquisition. So when tickets get sold, Eventbrite itself makes money. Some of that money can be put into paid acquisition, and again, that's then going to be put into uh, driving new creators who are going to create more events. So again, I've just done sort of two kind of little additional loops on here, but the idea here really is that you don't need to be recreating this whole loop, and you probably don't want to be creating loops that are completely separate from your core loop. If you've got a loop that's working really, really well, firstly, you want to focus on that primary growth loop. That is the sort of like number one thing. Once you've got that working really well, then you might want to think about these additional loops to kind of like get it going a bit better. So that was a quick kind of like intro to growth loops. I'm happy to answer any questions in the chat. But again, for those of you not familiar with Hustle Badger, just a quick kind of shout out for us. As I say, we support product managers and digital builders of all stripes with our courses, templates. We've got a wiki full of case studies, playbooks, and examples. We do regular webinars like this one, and we also have a Slack channel and run private workshops for people's companies as well. With that, I'll open it up to questions if there are any. Got any tips for tools to measure growth loops and keep track of sources? Um, you, I mean, generally, your whatever your product instrumentation is going to be useful for this. But I think again, going back to that point, that a lot of your growth loops might be cross-functional. So if your growth loop is sort of creating blog pages or creating content, then where you create that content, the impressions it gets, like that might be not on your platform or not on your website. So I think about like what is your loop first, and then think about where do you need to get information from. You might be able to get all of that from Amplitude or something like that. You might have to stitch together different data sources to come up with an integrated dashboard. Tim, I saw you asked another question earlier. How long should you try growth via a certain channel before you abandon it? Or would you recommend betting on multiple channels in parallel? So, um, usually what I do is understand what is going to be your major growth mechanism. Like, is that going to be paid? Sales, content, viral, like those major categories. And then I test like lots of different tactics within that category and see what sticks. And you basically want to optimize for learning and experimentation until you see one tactic that's working like much better than everything else. Then once you've got that, you want to double down on that growth lever and push that as hard as possible. So the it's not, it's going to be hypothesis driven, like where you make those bets, because every bet is going to take time, it's going to take effort. Some of them are going to take quite a bit of time, not just to kind of build and set up, but to see if they pay off. Um, but you want those bets to be driven by your hypothesis of what's going to work based on the interviews that you've done and your understanding of the customer journey. Super. Any other questions then before we wrap up? All right then. Well, thanks very much, everyone. Love to see you all, and hope to see you soon.